What better way to start off the new year than to review the new Superman adventures on the N64? Released in 1999, Superman 64, as it's commonly known, is infamous for being not only one of the worst superhero games of all time, but one of the worst video games ever, period. I stayed clear of this game for years because of all the preconceptions I had towards it, and a lot of those preconceptions stemmed from the internet. There was an oversaturation of Superman 64 related content online, and all of it is, well, not the most positive. When I made the decision to play through this game to capture the footage required for this review, I was somewhat concerned regarding my mental well-being, knowing how frustrating it had been for countless other people to play and sit through over the years. However, another realization sunk in, a small level of excitement, morbid curiosity, knowing that I would finally be able to play this game for the first time ever and share my honest thoughts on it. So that's what I'm gonna do. Is Superman 64 really one of the worst superhero games ever made? Do I think it's the worst I've ever played? Let's find out. Superman on the N64 was released in May of 1999 in North America, and is based on the highly acclaimed Superman the Animated Series that was on TV at the time. It features a wide cast of characters from the show, and its story centers around Lex Luthor trapping Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and Professor Hamilton in a virtual reality version of Metropolis, after throwing them into some sort of Stargate-like contraption. Within this virtual world, Superman must battle with his awkward flailing punches the likes of Brainiac, who had helped build the virtual reality with Luthor, Mala, who plans on blowing up the Metropolis hydroelectric dam with a series of explosives you must disarm, Metallo, who is sent after Lois Lane when she begins investigating Luthor's plans, and Parasite, who intends on killing Professor Hamilton at Star Labs. Darkseid even makes an appearance holding Jimmy prisoner in the Daily Planet's underground parking garage, in a level I found to be quite frustrating because it's like one big maze. If some of the schemes for these villains don't make a whole lot of sense, Darkseid's especially, what the fuck is he doing in a parking garage and why would he give two shits about Jimmy Olsen? Keep in mind that this entire game is set within a virtual reality version of Metropolis. All the levels, all the boss characters you face, it's a fabricated version of Superman's reality, all artificial. None of it has to make any fucking sense. And because of this, it makes this whole game, its environment, feel a lot more lifeless than the dated graphics even make it out to be. It's hard to really be invested in anything going on or anything you are doing, even if the lives of your allies are in danger. It just feels empty, hollow. Maybe the developers thought they were being clever with all of this. It is a video game after all, technically it's all artificial, right? But regardless of whether or not you take that into account, I still don't think this concept works, or at least does not hold up after all this time. They should have just made it the actual Metropolis, have Superman face off against the actual supervillains, and not have them be virtual reality versions of themselves. It's just not that interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the rings. You knew I was going to. They are without a doubt the most hated and discussed element of this entire game. Superman on the N64 does feature some indoor levels, but the vast majority take place outside in the virtual Metropolis. But rather than have you simply fly from point A to point B to get to your next objective so you can save your friends, you have to go through a series of rings with a time limit instead. And flying through these rings, oh boy, is it the drizzling shits. You are constantly battling the awkward joystick controls and hit detection with the buildings. Changing direction with Superman in the air is a lot harder than you might think. Flying through the rings seems like it would be easy, but it's not. Missing only a few of them results in failure, and you are forced to restart the entire ring section from the beginning if that happens. The time limit doesn't help, of course, and some of these sections give you barely enough to make it to the end. You really have to haul ass the entire time, and being that you are under pressure, you tend to make a lot more mistakes, and well, you know how frustrating that can be. Once you complete a timed ring section, you are then forced to take on some sort of challenge in order to save civilians. These civilians are virtual, so Superman shouldn't care for their safety, he's wasting his time, but I digress. Anyways, these tasks you are forced to do involve picking up and throwing objects, typically vehicles, carrying them through end goal checkpoints, blowing out tornadoes with your super breath, destroying countless LexCorp mine-launching robots, defeating a certain number of Dark Shadows, Luthor's army of cybernetic soldiers, and yeah, that's about it. You'll be doing this stuff over and over again on endless repeat. Between each indoor level, you might have to take on 1, 2, or 3 timed ring challenges with several of these boring and repetitive civilian missions in between. Saving the civilians can be tedious, but most of the objectives involving them are easy and take no time at all to complete. It's the rings that give you the most problems, and depending on how much difficulty you have with them, you can sometimes go hours before you get to play the next indoor section, desperate to see something new. Not to mention, if you are playing on the harder difficulties, for reasons I will bring up in a minute, the enemies in these civilian challenges act far more aggressive and make you fail a lot quicker and more frequently, and when that happens, regardless of the difficulty you are playing on, you don't start back at the civilian challenge. No. You will start back at the beginning of these ring sections. You'll end up playing the same thing over and over and over again on repeat, like you're flying in circles, literally. Superman is flying in fucking circles. While the indoor levels provide a change of pace to the shitstorm of frustration that are the rings, they aren't all that fun to play either. Yeah, you locate access cards and activate hidden computers to unlock doors, and even solve a few puzzles here and there, but they too get repetitive. Even the combat is garbage, because most enemies go down in a single hit, and the bosses, just mindless button mashing and nothing more. The only one I found to be somewhat challenging was Darkseid. I had to keep freezing him because his attacks did so much damage, and God forbid I would have to put myself through that annoying underground parking garage level again. It was terrible. Speaking of Darkseid, his battle features one of the funniest moments in this entire game, and I don't think it was intentional. After you drain his health to 0, he falls down and T-poses on the ground. It's at this point that you have to pick him up and carry him to the police so he can be arrested, until Superman can take him back to Apokolips or something. It's not really explained very well, but the fact that one of the strongest beings in the entire DC universe is just lifted up in a fixed T-pose and carried over to police for safekeeping is one of the funniest fucking things I have ever witnessed playing these kinds of games for the channel. It was insane. Anyways, the worst boss battle, or I guess the worst villain encounter in this entire game, would have to be the Parasite, hands down. The AI with him makes 0 sense, and he comes off like a buffoon. So right when the Star Labs level starts, you have to save Professor Hamilton. Parasite begins attacking you. I mean, he's located in the same room you are at the beginning. It makes sense. But once you deal enough damage to him, Parasite just stops attacking and stands there, allowing you to walk around and figure out where to go next. Once you locate Hamilton in the lower levels behind a laser barrier, you then have to go back up to the same room with Parasite and activate 3 computer terminals, and of course, he begins attacking you again. Once all 3 are activated, you guessed it, he stops attacking you and tells you you'll never defeat me without Hamilton's help. It's at this point you return to Professor Hamilton. He helps you turn on a force field trap to stop Parasite, and you humorously lure the villain into it without much pushback. And that's all that happens. It's pretty pitiful. What's really sad is that Parasite could be the final boss for you, depending on how you play this game. You see, in Superman 64, you can get one of 3 endings essentially. I know, seems complex, doesn't it, for a shitty game like this. If you play on easy mode, the final level is against Parasite. If you play on normal, you get one in the Metropolis subway against a giant Lexbot. And if you beat the game on hard, you get a series of annoying puzzles and a final encounter with Brainiac on his starship. Each difficulty expands the game by one additional level, so in order to get the full ending, the true ending, you have to beat this piece of shit game on the hardest difficulty setting, and that means rings. Rings up the ass. So many rings you'll be begging for Superman to break your neck just like he did General Zod's in Man of Steel. But what if I told you there was a simple way to turn off the rings? Turn off those dreadful ring challenges sprinkled throughout so much of this game, allowing you to focus on everything else with it. The combat, the indoor levels, the boss battles, the story, or what little there is of a story at least. It's something no one seems to really talk about regarding this game, information nobody seems to want to share with the rest of the world. All you have to do is play on easy mode, and voila, it turns off all the rings. Sure, the flying sequences become far more boring without them, giving you a time limit to essentially fly right into a spinning Superman logo to start your next objective, and the sandbox of Metropolis with its terrible draw distance is a lot more barren without those flashy rings laid all throughout it, but it makes Superman 64 resemble more of a game. It makes it far more tolerable and in turn playable. Even if you do manage to beat this game on its highest difficulty setting, called Superman mode, the ending is insulting. All that happens is Superman's allies are rescued from the virtual world, and then the game tells you that Lex Luthor is still free in the real one. So yeah, it all seems like a big fuck you, doesn't it? A complete waste of time. One of the biggest issues I had with Superman 64, disregarding all the other crap I just mentioned, is the fact that using Superman's powers require you to find pickups scattered throughout the levels. The idea of Superman not being able to use his super breath or laser vision until you find a pickup for it feels really wrong, fundamentally wrong. As Superman, you should not be held back in this way. You should have access to all of his abilities at any given time. The Man of Steel feels kind of weak in this game. He's been nerfed. I know in the Superman animated series, the show's creators made Superman weaker than his comic book counterpart, having him become physically injured much easier to make him more relatable to the audience, and that was fine. I didn't have a problem with it in the context of that show. But here, it's a video game for Christ's sake. You should be able to use all of Superman's powers, to deal with all of the obstacles put in your way. You want to feel like Superman, you want to feel empowered, but here you don't, not really. Unfortunately, there is a sad story as to why Superman was weakened like this in the game, and actually it explains a lot of the issues found within Superman on the Nintendo 64. I do not blame the developers for the final product. They tried their best to make the most faithful Superman game that they possibly could, given their situation. You see, the development of Superman on the N64 took place over the span of 2 years, and shortly into that development window, shortly after the developers Titus had acquired the rights to make a Superman game, the licensing team at Warner Bros. Changed. This new team had animosity towards the developers of Superman 64, and believed the game they were making was going in the wrong direction. They wanted a bigger developer to work on it because that way they could make more money from licensing out the IP. Every decision Titus had made regarding Superman 64 had to be passed by the licensing team at Warner Bros., and they fought tooth and nail with Titus over every little detail, slowing down the entire development process. The WB licensing team mandated several things that Titus had to include in their Superman game. They had to make it so that Superman would be viewed in a positive light. To do so, they had to limit the use of his powers. I guess if players got trigger happy with the laser vision and began zapping everything in sight, it would have been a bad image for the Man of Steel, or at least in the eyes of the licensing team at the time. They also wanted to make sure that Superman wouldn't harm civilians, and thus the entire city of Metropolis was turned into a virtual one, completely eliminating civilians altogether, apart from the ones you save in those brief challenges or within the indoor levels, of course, but again, they aren't real. The horrendous rings that you are forced to fly through for what feels like 90% of the game were only supposed to be part of the tutorial, and that's it. Problem is, due to the licensing team forcing the virtual world setting onto the game, not to mention the pressure they were putting on the developers, which slowed everything down, Titus was forced to implement the rings into more of the game, not only due to the fact that they fit in with the virtual world aesthetic, but because they were a simple way to pad out the game's length. With all these changes Titus was forced to make and the rules mandated to them by the Warner Bros. Licensing team, it's a miracle the game is in the state it is now. It could have been much worse. The development process of Superman 64 sounds like a complete dumpster fire. I'm surprised Titus was able to get anything done on it. The sad thing is, I do believe there was a good, or at least decent, Superman game somewhere in here, buried deep beneath all of these fucking rings. If the immature and misguided licensing team at Warner Bros. Had just given Titus a chance with this IP, and not just focus on how much money they could have made off the whole project elsewhere, I feel Titus could have made something Superman fans could have really enjoyed, at least at the time. Would the game have been perfect? God no. But for the first ever 3D Superman game, it most likely would have been passable. You would have been able to sink a lot more time into it and enjoy it far more than you do the current version. And speaking of versions, following the critical and commercial failure of Superman on the N64, Titus had given their resources to Blue Sky Software to make an updated version of the game on the original PlayStation, which probably would have seen a release sometime in 2000 or possibly 2001. The graphics and level design were updated. There were new cutscenes which added more focus and structure to the game's story. New villains would be included like Mr. Mixie's Pitlick, and some levels even implemented the use of various suits, which was something the Superman animated series explored here and there. Of course, this game never came to be, despite being approved by Sony, as the licensing rights from Warner Bros. Expired and the whole project fell through. It's a damn shame, because I think it would have undone a lot of the wrongs the N64 game had given us, and dare I say, it may have become one of the best Superman games ever released. And guess what? There were no rings, so automatically it's a masterpiece compared to the N64 version. Superman on the N64 is bad. It's a bad superhero game. There is no sense denying it, but I think a lot of people are too harsh on it, not realizing what was going on behind the scenes between Titus and Warner Bros. The game was essentially sabotaged from day one, and it was destined to be a rushed and unfinished mess. The story of Superman 64 is a sad one, and kind of a what-if scenario. I love Superman the Animated Series, and I just wish it had been given a game all of us fans could have really sunk our teeth into. It deserved so much better. Something I do want to make perfectly clear about this game, though, is that Superman 64 is not the worst superhero game I have played when the rings are turned off, and that is important. I can't stress that enough. Playing without rings can be kind of fun in a humorous way, a so bad it's good kind of way. The game is tolerable, somewhat enjoyable, but when you play with the rings, when you play on hard mode, this game is excruciating. One of the most difficult games I have ever attempted to beat, not because you necessarily lack the skills to get the job done, but because you lack the immense patience required to complete it. You don't need me to tell you that doing the same thing over and over again, sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of times, because Lord knows how many rings in total are in this game, quite frankly, I don't want to know, is straining on one's patience. I swear this game could be used as a means of psychological torture. It could hold its own against some of the most brutal forms of torture ever conceived. Am I exaggerating? Maybe a little bit, but just a little bit. Well, that concludes my review of Superman on the Nintendo 64. Do I recommend it? Of course not. What do you think I am, crazy? But I also don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say it is when you turn off those pesky rings, and only when you turn off those pesky rings. Because if you have them on, and if you are playing on the hardest difficulty setting to get that final ending, then you are looking at the worst superhero game in existence that I have played thus far at least. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified of all the future content I release. If you would like to have a say in which superhero game I look at next, fast track a particular one you want me to talk about, you can become a producer for my channel over on patreon.com/channel NerdGasm. I will see you all in the next one. Take care and stay nerdy.